It is a great pleasure for me to open this 83rd Quok Talk. And the title is Struggle and Success, Inspiring Stories of Transforming Assessment from Across Europe. It is also a great pleasure that several partners of the Alliance for Childhood have taken up this project and are presenting this together. It is the European Council for Steiner Waldorf Education, the Learning for Wellbeing Foundation, and the Hungarian Waldorf Federation. And we do this together with the Lifelong Learning Platform. And it is also a great pleasure that Mr. Geuking from Germany is hosting this event, co-hosting this event again. And it is, I give now the floor to Mr. Geuking to say a few words of welcome to our group.
Thank you. Es ist mir eine Ehre und Freude, Sie heute hier anlässlich der Buchvorstellung begrüßen zu dürfen.
It is my honor and pleasure to meet and welcome you here today on the occasion of the book presentation.
Eine weitere Veranstaltung innerhalb der Lifelong Learning Week mit 3 hervorragenden Partnern, wie ich finde.
It's another event within the Lifelong Learning Week with partners, with very important partners that we work with.
Eigentlich finden diese Veranstaltungen im Europaparlament statt. Hoffen wir, dass wir bald diese Covid-19-Krise überstanden haben und ich Sie im nächsten Jahr auch wieder im Parlament begrüßen darf.
On a typical basis, these events take place within the European Parliament. Let's hope that we will soon have overcome this COVID-19 crisis and that I will be able to welcome you back to Parliament next year.
Obwohl Covid-19 seine Schatten vorauswirft und Veranstaltungen massiv behindert, gelingt es der Allianz for Childhood, immer wieder tolle Veranstaltungen wie diese online auch zu organisieren. Dafür sage ich allen Akteuren nochmal ganz vielen lieben Dank.
Yes. Although COVID-19 is casting its shadow and massively hindering events, the Alliance for Childhood is always able to organize great events online. And for this, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to all of those involved.
Sie Ich habe nichts gemacht. Sorry. Okay, yeah. Sorry. Sie treten ein für eine tolle Sache und präsentieren das, was allzu oft fehlt. Der gesellschaftspolitische Dialog mit der Beteiligung der Bürger an der Politikgestaltung. Sie vermitteln das notwendige Vertrauen, bringen das Fachwissen mit und steigen in den sozialen Dialog ein.
Yes, you stand up for a great cause and all too often present what is missing. The socio-political dialogue with the participation of citizens in policy making. They convey the necessary trust, bring the specialist knowledge with them and enter into social dialogue.
Also ich kann das gar nicht oft genug betonen. Mit Ihrer Arbeit in den Bereichen allgemeine und berufliche Bildung und lebenslanges Lernen im nationalen Kontext erweitern Sie die EU-Zusammenarbeit auf vielen Ebenen. Sie schlagen die notwendigen Brücken. So werden wir heute unter anderem auch unseren Blick nach Ungarn und Rumänien richten.
So I cannot stress it enough that with your work in education, training and lifelong learning in a national context, you are expanding EU cooperation on many levels. You are building the necessary bridges so that today we will also direct our gaze to Hungary and Romania, among other things.
Aber nun habe ich wirklich genug geredet. Lassen Sie uns mit der heutigen Veranstaltung und Buchvorstellung Kampf und Erfolg nun beginnen. Ihnen, meine Damen und Herren, wünsche ich viel Vergnügen mit viel Informationen und regen Austausch untereinander. Danke, dass Sie heute hier teilnehmen.
But now I think I've talked enough. Let's talk about the event, today's event and the book launch, Fight and Success. I just want to say that I wish you, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of joy with all the information and lively exchanges. Thank you for participating today.
Ich muss noch ganz kurz anfügen,
I should like to add quickly,
dass ich leider die Veranstaltung nicht bis zum Ende beiwohnen kann, weil ich habe um 13 Uhr einen Termin in Deutschland und ich bin noch in Brüssel und ich muss jetzt, ich wollte jetzt die Veranstaltung eröffnen und ich muss jetzt leider nach Deutschland fahren. um den Termin um 13 Uhr wahrzunehmen.
So I just quickly wanted to add that due to previous engagement that I have at 1 o'clock in Germany, I'm only able to open this event, but I'm not able to stay for its entirety. But also I wish you all the best throughout it. Thank you very much.
Okay, vielen Dank und viel Vergnügen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Goyking. Thank you, Mr. Goyking, for anyhow for opening this event and to be with us and to keep the contact. Now I introduce to you Christopher Clowder, who will say a few words about the theme, a reflection about the theme. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to refer to, first of all, a book that you all know very well, Learning the Treasure Within, that was published in 1996. It's a volume of wisdom. And I think although it's published now 25 years ago by the Delors Commission, it's as relevant today as it was then. And Learning the Treasure Within applies not only to children and young people, but actually the ideas in here apply to us for our whole lives. The 4 pillars of learning: learning to do, learning to know, learning to be, and learning to live with others. And I think it's something we should constantly refer to. It was a breakthrough in its time, but I think is something we can all learn from and work on that text. After Jacques Delors and his committee had produced this book, he went on to talk about competences. And in another book called Defining and Selecting Competences, he's got a little passage that I'd just like to read to you, which I think is relevant to today. There is a contradiction which we see as only apparent between the utilitarian, that is to say, economical and useful view of competences on the one hand, and on the other, the view of competences as being liberating forces, enabling individuals to take charge of their own lives. I'll read it once more. There is a contradiction, which we see as only apparent, between the utilitarian, that is to say, economical or useful view of competences on the one hand, and on the other, the view of competences as being liberating forces, enabling individuals to take charge of their own lives. So this diagnosis of our educational dilemma, on one hand, this utilitarian, data-driven, measurement-driven, the evidence that we do need to understand the world we live in. And on the other side, these liberating forces where each person, each child can find their own potential. He points out there's a contradiction, but he inserts a word which we see as only apparent. In other words, it's not a true contradiction in his view. It seems to be a contradiction. And reflecting on what we're looking at today, I was been wondering, what is the bridge between this utilitarian view of education and this liberating view of education? What connects them? In the text that Michael produced for us, this paper, as an introduction, he uses the word story. I've often been struck by Michael's use of the word story over the years. And I've never asked him if it's an inadvertent or if it's a conscious use of the word. Because what we're looking at in academic terms would be called case studies. That would be the familiar word. We're looking at case studies. And that here is the word story. And thinking about it, I think the story is more important. It's a more important word. Because of a case study, and I've been involved in many of them in my career, you take a distance, you look at the case and you study it from a little way away and observe it and note it and try and understand it. But a story is closer. When we tell each other stories, which we do all the time, our world is full of stories, whether founding stories, myths, legends, fairy tales, romantic stories, identity stories, national stories. The air around us is full of stories. Novels, films, whatever. We're full of stories. We need stories. They're our nourishment, soul nourishment, that we depend on a lot to be able to define our lives and enable our competences. We need stories. So I think the story element is important because it raises an empathetic understanding. A story goes a little deeper than a case study. When you're told the story, your feelings are more engaged and they become a spur for action. If we want to be active in the world, it's by telling each other stories. And we do it all the time, often unconsciously. Yeah? And our stories are always evolving and changing. So I was actually very pleased that it's not case studies we're looking at today, but stories, because all stories involve human endeavor, human action, human change, human vision. Stories embody that quality in us that takes us into doing things, not just thinking, studying, observing things. So I'm looking very much, and I'm sure you are, to the stories we're going to hear during this morning's event. Thank you.
Here you're muted.
Thank you, Christopher, for these nice words of introduction and reflection. And now we go to the project team who take on the events further with us together. Okay, I give it to, I think, Ilona.
Hello, everyone. Actually, I'm not going to start today. So I am just having a look. I think I shall hand it over to Shanti.
I, in turn, will hand it over to Georg. As you see, we are a very flexible and nimble project team, and that will be illustrated further. Georg.
Yes, so following to Christopher's beautiful introductory words, we are now giving you more stories, and before we dive into the actual stories around 4 of the assessment practices from this wonderful book, I would like to give you an insight into how this project and book came about, and will then hand over to my colleagues to actually present a little bit what you can find in this book before we dive deeper into some examples. So the story of this book actually goes back to July 2016, when, in the framework of a Quack Talk like the one today, the former Director General for Education, Martine Reichertz, spoke on behalf of the European Commission. And in this meeting, we asked her how we could advocate for a more personalized and formative assessment culture in Europe. And the result of this question was that she invited us, the European Council for Steiner Waldorf Education, to a meeting at the Directorate General for Education, where we talked to her about our work. And essentially, she stressed the importance of providing policymakers with evidence, and stressed the importance of evidence-based policy making in general. And our puzzle was back then that we didn't know how to produce large-scale studies as a small network. So as an alternative, she suggested to present good practices, inspiring stories instead. And that's what we took her up on, and formed a working group in the framework of the Alliance for Childhood, where Learning for Wellbeing, our partner organization for this book, started to work with us on identifying these stories, and soon we noticed that this exchange is immensely helpful to organize our thinking. But if we want to really have an impact, we will need a project. And this is when the idea for this Erasmus project was born. And to tell you more about the project, I will now hand over to my colleague. I think it's going to be Marty who would be taking this on now. Marty Domokos, please.
Thank you, Georg. Just then to finish Georg's thoughts. So that was the point when I was also asked on behalf of parents, because I'm the coordinator of the European Network of Steiner Waldorf Parents, to join this group. And I also work for the Hungarian Waldorf Federation, which has many schools and kindergartens, Waldorf schools and kindergartens, and then we there also thought it would be a good idea to join this group and think about this project. And at that point, there was also the possibility to write an Erasmus Plus project collecting good practices, and somehow things just fell, those pieces of the puzzle just fell, just got together, and so we embarked on this Erasmus Plus project on assessment with the Learning for Wellbeing Foundation, with the European Council for Steiner Waldorf Education and the Hungarian Waldorf Federation. And I'm not going into details of the ups and downs and the beauties and the hardships of the project. Needless to say that also we had the whole COVID period within our project, which came with delays, of course, and all our wonderful ideas of meeting every single teacher that we collected the practices from live. So we had to let go of those things. But today I'm now going to concentrate on the book itself and give you a brief overview of the book. I would just like to tell you also that it was a labor of love. We started out wanting to produce a brochure of 100 pages where we just tell some stories, and those stories became so beautiful and inspiring that now we have a 300 pages book, including those 20 practices from 12 different countries. Those practices were collected from 12 schools, and I just saw that 4 will present their practices here, but I also want to thank those teachers and school leaders who joined us today, although their practices won't be shown today, but I saw many familiar names in the audience, so thank you for being with us today. Now I'm going to share my screen and show you the book itself. Just a second, I'm just going to try to make it bigger. Yes. So this is I start with the back. That wasn't what I meant to do. So as you could see, the book is also available in a physical form. So if any of you would like to receive one, please let us know after today. So our book is called Assessment as Dialogue, because dialogue is a huge element, dialogue between teachers and school leaders, parents, pupils is a very important element in our book. And as you can see here, that it is an Erasmus Plus project that's also mentioned in and on our book, and the logos of the 3 organizations. So I would also like to thank the contribution of our 3 collectors, which were Shanti George, who will talk a bit today and lead us through the practices, and Ilona de Haas, who will lead the post-coc session later, and Cecilia Skarka from Hungary, who collected our Hungarian practices. the book is starts with a brief over so with the contents, but there you can see that we divided the book into 5 parts, which was a logical division, because the first practices are from schools when that deal with the transition from kindergarten to primary school. In part 2, we have practices from primary schools, and then we also took on this transition between primary and secondary schools, and then entered secondary school. We have the most practices from there, and then also the part when young adults leave school and how they deal with the transition between school and tertiary education. We also included a wonderful poem. Please read it whenever you have the book, it's worth it. Then we have an introduction, which is also a very important part where we tell the story and also talk about the need for this book. Yes. And Shanti will tell us more about this, what we call the assessment flower, after I finish showing you the book itself. And then we have brief summaries of all the practices that follow. And I was just wondering which practice to show you how a practice is written up in our book. And I thought I would get the most inspiring, the most impressive, and then I started looking into the book, but I didn't find the most inspiring and most interesting, because they all are. They are wonderful stories. So I picked one out from Hungary, where, and why I did it is that this won't be shown to you today, and also because in this, it is incredibly important, the element of cooperation between a teacher and parents in Hungary. And this teacher, Christian Freigand, is also with us today here. Thank you, Christian, for joining us. So in our practices, we first introduce the school itself, because there needs to be a nurturing environment for these practices to so for these teachers to be able to implement their practices. And then we have what we call an identity card for every practice, where we summarize the practice itself and also show what kind of assessment is included in it. So for example, with this practice, it's a formative, ipsative and collaborative assessment practices, which are interwoven within this story. And after that, we introduce the teacher, because as Christopher said, stories need to go deeper. So these stories wouldn't exist without these teachers, without these courageous teachers. So we have this introduction, and then we show the practice itself. So this is how our book is set up, and I think this is enough to show from the book itself. And I will give now the word to Shanti, who will show you the assessment, or the assessment flower that we love so much. Just a second. No, just. Yes, so Shanti.
Thank you very much, Marty. This is our way of summarizing the insights from these 20 inspiring practices put together from 20 schools across Europe. The insights are put in the language of the Learning for Wellbeing Foundation and Steiner Waldorf Education. But I'm sure that all of you here from various backgrounds in progressive education with what is said here, and later can provide your own experiences and insights. Why a flower? Our belief is that school settings and anywhere where children learn should enable them and encourage them to flower, to flourish, to thrive. Unfortunately, assessment at the moment is experienced by very many children, the statistics show this, as stress, as something that blights their lives, and even some say a form of torture. How can assessment allow children in a class to bloom? If the assessment is dialogue with the child and with significant adults, and not a performance assessment delivered over a child's head. So here are the petals of the flower summarize the principles of elements of assessment as dialogue towards wholeness, towards addressing a child as a whole and complete person, and not just a mind to be trained in a curriculum. I'm sure you will recognize some of the elements we have highlighted here, the engaged participation of each child rather than a passive ticker of multiple choice questions or reproducers of standard answers. Each child as a distinctive individual with unique potential, the importance of processes and relationships rather than looking only at numerical grades and outcomes. Now, people might look at this flower and say, this is utopia. But it is not. The 20 stories in the book demonstrate that these practices already exist. We have only 20 here, but I'm sure there are many more that courageous teachers and school leaders are experimenting with and developing. And what is more, some of these practices have actually been recognized at the policy level, thereby giving us more hope. And we are going to demonstrate this with 4 cases, sorry, Christopher, 4 stories that will take us from early childhood all the way to leaving school, especially leaving school as someone who was a potential early school leaver. The first of these stories comes from Romania, where there is a remarkable success of 142 primary schools that use written reports and not numerical grades. And the story behind this policy success will be narrated to us next by Carmen and Adriana from the StepbyStep Center for Professional and Education in Romania. Welcome, Adriana and Carmen.
Thank you. Thank you. And when it's possible, we will share our slideshow with you. Thank you. And Carmen will introduce our lovely story. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very nice being here today with you, discussing about assessment and how this changes the life of children. Our story, the StepbyStep Center, began over 25 years ago. Our early childhood organization and also promoting the step-by-step educational alternative within the national educational system in Romania. We are also a founding member of the International Step-by-Step Association, which unites such national organizations like ours around the shared pedagogy. As I mentioned, we started back in 1994 in 10 public kindergartens, and at the end of the school year 1994, the parents in one preschool group requested for the experience to be extended at primary school level, and we did so. We opened back in 1995 2 classrooms using the step-by-step educational alternative in one public school close to the Black Sea shore, where we stimulated, from which we stimulated wider demand at the national level in the years that followed. Today, we are present in 723 primary school classrooms across all country in 142 schools. And we look in all the step-by-step classrooms at assessment as being an ongoing process that aims to support progress in acquiring skills, developing competencies, while achieving the goals of learning for each child. In step-by-step, we look at learning as a continuous process, also with assessment constantly accompanying the process and the learner in order to support the learner rather than to judge or test him or her, where learning is the natural business of all children. Assessment must be an ongoing process to monitor where the child is learning in a manner that best suits that particular child, rhythm and orientation and trajectory. When we started in 1995, the national system used numerical grades. We developed the evaluation notebooks where we register the progress of the child and the learning experience of each child through a descriptive assessment that makes transparent what is being learned and how by each child, with specific details for the child, the peers, the teachers, other professionals in the school supporting the child, and also the parents who are considered the partners of the school throughout the learning process. We also used this approach and we extended it to children with special needs, that considering that all the step-by-step classrooms are inclusive classrooms, and also we use them in multiple forms of religion, as also in linguistic minority groups. All these types of assessment were used. The values that the type of assessment that we develop is based on are shown on the screen. And we consider that this type of assessment enables parents to follow and support their children's learning. Coordination. So we consider that this kind of assessment supports parents in supporting their children across school and home. Also offers information to teachers and professionals. And when this kind of assessment emerged in the step-by-step classrooms, step-by-step being the first child-centered program in primary schools in Romania, it was in a sharp contrast with what was going on in the existing system at that point. This written assessment crystallized to fit into the appropriate spaces that the instruments that we developed and we call evaluation notebooks that are recognized as official documents within the system, and children, if they move from a step-by-step classroom to a traditional classroom, they will take this evaluation notebook with them, and new teachers and new groups will have information about how and what they learned. We were able to gain recognition for our alternative education and the pedagogy that we are using within the national curriculum. While using these personalized descriptions and not grades from the very beginning of our program back in 1995, as I've already mentioned, it was a major investment that we made from the very first day in the partnership with the Ministry of Education, the county school inspectorates, school management, as well as we invested in professional development and retraining the existing staff. It was a choice that we made instead of building a parallel system. Step-by-step classrooms were led from the very beginning by 2 teachers that are paid by the state, and that gave us the space to use our resources in creating events and training sessions to support all the step-by-step teachers all along the way on a yearly basis. Thank you very much. This was our story.
Thank you very much, Carmen and Adriana. You have given us one story of struggle and success. We are going now to listen to a very different story as we move from early childhood, entering school, to the primary school setting. We will now hear from the courageous school leader of an experimental school in Amsterdam, Laterna Magica, or Magic Lantern, which presented a completely different idea of what school education should be like, and had many confrontations with the Inspectorate of Education, but was finally declared to be a school of excellence. The story will be told by Annette van Valkengoed, the former director, and she will begin with a video that will give us a sense of what it is like to attend this delightful school. Thank you, Annette.
Welkom in het gebouw van Laterna Magica in Amsterdam. De plek waar alle kinderen tot 12 jaar van 's ochtends vroeg tot 's avonds laat kunnen leren, spelen en ontdekken.
Als we erover praten, dus tegen iets van een interview, dan zeggen we meestal Laterna Magica. Maar als we er zelf over praten, dan zeggen we, ja, ik heb op school dit gedaan.
Meestal zit je op andere scholen de hele tijd in één ruimte. En hierbij wissel je steeds van ruimte.
We gaan ook veel vaker op uitjes en dat soort dingen. En dat maakt deze school ook heel speciaal.
Het is anders dan normale scholen. Het is een soort van vrijkeuzeschool.
Ik vind het leuker om ook nog iets anders te doen dan alleen maar rekenen en spelling.
Er zijn mensen die zijn heel erg praktisch willen werken, die kunnen naar het aannemersbedrijf om daar te gaan bouwen en zo.
Het politiebureau die regelt dan alles zodat wij op het podium kunnen dansen.
Ik zit in het ontwerpteam. Wij ontwerpen posters, visitekaartjes, reclames en dat soort dingen.
Wij zijn nu aan het masseren, zodat je weer helemaal rustig wordt.
Het is heel lekker. Dit is het naaiatelier. Er wordt heel veel genaaid en heel veel ontwerpen gemaakt.
Ik ben bezig met een boek schrijven. Komt ongeveer over een maand uit.
Ik ben vegetarische lasagne aan het maken.
Wat is gewoon?
Gorgonzola.
Gorgonzola is een soort kaas.
Het ruikt lekker.
Kinderen leren en spelen binnen en buiten schooltijd in Laterna Magica en kunnen hun talenten op hun eigen manier ontwikkelen.
Deze recepten hebben we allemaal gemaakt. Ja, dat kan je kopen bij de takeaway en dan hoef je niet meer boodschappen te doen.
Ik heb ook andere vrienden en die zitten dan op een andere school en dan hebben ze weer dezelfde dag gehad. En bij ons is dat gewoon nooit hetzelfde.
Je kan eigenlijk meer aan je eigen talenten werken. Er zijn ook soms drama-workshops. Daar kunnen mensen voor theater naartoe gaan.
Ik heb hier een musical gedaan.
Je leert ook om jezelf durven te laten zien. Eerst stond ik meestal een beetje achterin, omdat ik alles nog niet echt goed wist. Maar nu heb ik wel meer zelfvertrouwen daarin gekregen.
Laterna Magica is een van de vele kindercentra waar professionals uit onderwijs, kinderopvang en jeugdhulp dagelijks vanuit één visie werken met kinderen.
Kinderen zijn hier mede-eigenaar van de leer- en leefomgeving en dat is heel erg motiverend voor kinderen. Dat is echt. Dat is bijvoorbeeld de dierenverzorgers, dat is de kinderkunstuitleen, huismeesters zijn. Elk kind heeft hier wel een rol en daarmee hou je ook die nieuwsgierigheid vast. Durven ze dingen uit te proberen, durven ze ook fouten te maken en daar leer je van.
Er zijn denk ik ook niet veel scholen die dieren en vooral varkens op hun school hebben. En je leert ook echt verantwoordelijk te zijn voor de dieren. Het is wel leuk zijn als iedereen de kans kreeg om dit te doen.
Ik denk uiteindelijk dat dit eigenlijk een normale school gaat worden. Tenminste, dat hoop ik. Want ik vind dat alle kinderen in Nederland wel zo'n school verdienen.
Hij ging wel beter. Ik had hem.
Oké.
just got a sneak peek of Laterna Magica. And yeah, thank you for inviting me and tell you something about this school and the success and the struggles along the way. And I will take you on this journey for 5 minutes. Is it possible to show the slides? And I will tell something about Laterna Magica. This journey started in 2007. And I founded Laterna Magica, and we created a space where children, professionals, and parents can experiment with learning, living, and working together. And the goal is to make the world a little more beautiful, more sustainable, social, and democratic by a human-centered approach and authentic learning, a transforming education and every child to full bloom. So please show the next slides. And show the next slide, please. Laterna Magica is a place where no child drops out. It's inspired by the original meaning of the Greek word for school, a place for free time, a free space, where you can learn from real life and for real life, where time is never split up into increments and never filled up. It's a place without barriers to learning, and barriers in the shape of classrooms, year groups, teaching hours, tests, and subjects. But instead of this, authentic learning. And please show me the next slide. Authentic learning with projects that serve the community, exhibitions, internships, field studies, and an authentic learning environment. And please show me the next slide. And this new concept was vulnerable. A continuous struggle between defending and developing. It was a battle between hard and softness. And hard meant perseverance, to keep going. People did not always like this. And soft meant listening. But if you listen too much, it could mean losing sight, letting go of the mission. And we got very critical questions from parents, from the Inspectorate of Education, the Municipal Health Service, and the board, and questions from a strict and tight framework of evaluation, questions that forced us to think about every aspect and to search solutions, to build bridges and to make connections. And some of this struggles with the Inspectorate, I will tell you now. So please, the next slides. When the Inspectorate of Education in 2009 came by, I was scared. It was scary. I asked them to stay an extra day, and I made myself vulnerable to ask for feedback, knowing the very strict framework didn't fit our concepts. And some of my colleagues didn't sleep for weeks because they had a bad experience before with the Inspectorate. And I felt very responsible. When ticking boxes was the way of working, it was checking the checklist. And the first day of the visit of the Inspectorate, we looked through the eyes of the Inspectorates, and this meant the regular tight framework of evaluation. And as expected, the inspector was very, very confused. I could see she was mixed up. And I was so glad I had the second day. And the second day, I asked the inspector to look through my eyes, to look at natural learning, or in other words, social constructivism, authentic learning, and working from values. And that was exciting. It was vulnerable for the both of us, letting go our pattern. I remember us walking through the school together, observing, listening to each other as critical friends, and asking questions and looking from each other's perspective. And sitting at a table, red-cheeked, vulnerable and powerful at the same time. And after 2 days, we both had learned from each other. I'm sure of that. And to develop natural learning, it's necessary that all parties find a way of working together towards a bigger plan. And development went super fast at that time. And the next slide, in 2014, there was a second visit of the Inspectorate of Education, and they wrote in their report, the integral quality approach is a strong point of Laterna Magica. And in 2016, Laterna Magica's Triband accountability matrix was included in the advice of the Educational Council called the Full Breadth of Educational Quality. And we were asked to provide training to the Inspectorate of Education on their internal study day about transforming assessments. And we continue to shift from quality control to quality system, from a focus on parts of the education to focus on the entire educational process, and from focus on accountability to focus on developing the organization to a learning organization. And the last slide, please. In 2019, the third visit of the Inspectorate of Education. And Laterna Magica became an excellent school according to the inspection board. We started in 2007 with 17 children, and nowadays it is a free space for 900 children with 900 individual development plans, 900 individual continual development pathways from the age of 0 till 12. And the key of our success, I think, is we did both. Most formative methods and a little summative. And we built a new framework of evaluation, and we did more than the inspection asked. We built the bridge, walking on it, and we are still walking on it. Okay, thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you for telling us your story, Aneta, so vivid and in a first-hand way where we felt that we too were with the Inspector of Education with our beating hearts and red cheeks. So we move now from the Netherlands to Denmark, and we are now going to have a double view of struggle and success. Ilona de Haas from the Steiner Waldorf Educational Circles will tell us about the political struggle. This was the political struggle to have a written report instead of a report with numerical grades accepted by law in Denmark. And following Ilona, Saskia Henriksen of the school will describe some of the pedagogical struggles, because new practices, creative assessment, they're not a magic wand. Instead, they're a source of dilemma and struggle themselves, but a very worthwhile one, as Saskia will tell us. Thank you, Ilona, and then Saskia.
So hello again, everybody. I'm feeling very full of warmth and enthusiasm hearing all of you and these stories that of course I already know, that I'm lucky to know already, but every time I hear them again, it makes me feel full of hope and joy. So thank you for sharing that today. And I just wanted to, yes, before Saskia goes on and talked about more the I would say the pedagogical aspect, I just wanted to share something that was very important about this practice in Denmark, because this change in the law and this possibility to replace numerical grades by a written report at the end of secondary school and still be able to apply to university for Danish pupils was actually a long struggle. And this struggle was led by a group of 4 parents and many more that were involved, but at least it was led by a group of 4 parents from the Waldorf environment, from the Waldorf schools in Denmark, who each had a very different capacity or different competences and richness to bring to the debate, and who really decided to make this happen. And it took 10 years. But 10 years of very intense work. Some of it was, of course, producing written information. They produced 2 books, one that was more talking to with some testimonies of how Waldorf schools are doing things and how it works and what difference does it make. And then, of course, more of a scientific university level paper with some data about it. And then, of course, a lot of discussion at the political level. And of course, they would be best to say exactly what made it possible. What I do remember from their testimony is that in the end, even though it was actually initially for a very small number of schools compared to the number of schools in the country, the total number of schools, there was something in the politicians that were following them that was convinced by what they were saying, and that made them want to carry it further and change this law. And so just to say that they are there, this is not something that just happened and then will be left as it is. It is of course followed and monitored, and there will be an evaluation, I think this year or next year, to see how this is actually translated, and so there's a follow-up process, of course, with every pupil that is also applying to university and going further in their life with this other type of diploma, if I can put it that way, with a diploma that doesn't give a number to their success, but that actually gives a more of a deep insight into who they are. So I'm not going to take any more time from Saskia's presentation, but I just wanted to say that because I think it was very important, and that these people worked very, very hard to manage this. And Saskia, you have a lot of, yes, in internal insight on this. So I will let you go on, and thank you so much for sharing your story once again.
Thank you. And thank you for telling the political part, because that is not my story to tell. I'm just the one implementing it. But even before it was made acknowledged, we had the practice and it didn't change a lot. There were many other changes when it became law, but not so much how we wrote. Of course, we had to formalize it a bit more, but we have had experience in writing for many years before that. In Denmark, we're so lucky that at our Steiner schools, we've been practicing this from class 1 till class 12, where they're 18 and leave school. And I've been a class teacher for 10 years and also a subject teacher for many more than that. So every Easter, hopefully a little earlier, I start sitting down and writing these evaluations for all my pupils. And they're very different depending on who you're writing to. If you're writing to the parents in class 1, or if you're writing the final report for class 12 when they're 18 and leaving school. And it was, the chapter was called "The Art of Writing Good Reports." It's it's a nice title because it is an art, I think, but not an art that we choose. It's just something we have to do because we work in a Steiner school. So I was asked to try and pinpoint 3 things about writing these reports that with sort of pros and cons for it. And I'd say the first, what can you say? I find it hard to call it a struggle because I don't see it as a struggle as much because the idea carries it. But to write a written report to a student or someone who's 18 who is going to take this report out and use it for whatever they want to do, you have to have a relationship with the student or have worked very close to in order so that you can write about how they have developed. It's based, a written report is based on the child itself or the student and not on what they ought to have learned or what they ought to be at the end of school. We kind of document their learning process. And in order to document this process, we take the whole person into account. So it's not just the results of the various little tests you've been doing for the last, let's say, 2 years, but how have you implemented the help you got from the teacher, or how do you work with your classmates? All these things, they're taken into account. In order for you to be able to document that, you have to kind of enter a relationship with the student, which is more than just reading or listening. You have to understand and you have to show an interest in their life and in their personal struggles and ups and downs. If you've, let's say, for example, I have a student, he's 18 and in the lessons, he's been more or less asleep. He knows how to write what I want and he knows how to answer correctly. He's bright and so, but the homework not so much, and he's a bit arrogant with the classmates are a bit slow and stuff. You have to kind of put that into a report as well, because that matters for who you are as a person, and not just because he could probably pass an exam and get the grade because he's a great performer, maybe. But doing an evaluation on the whole person, on the student, is more than just that. Or you can have this, you can have a student who's struggling, who's finding the subject really hard, but really, really wanting to learn. And this whole enthusiasm, you get the luxury of writing down as well. So if he or she went to an exam, it probably wouldn't have gone so well, but in a written report, I get to sit down and say, wow, you've done a fantastic job and you've really worked. Every time I said something to you, you try to implement it, and so on and so on. And so you kind of give them a picture of who they are, and that motivates them. Well, unless you're really lazy, and that's kind of been told, but that's another story. But it's based on relationship. And this is the big question for many of us is, can you, no matter how refined you are as a teacher, can you actually be 100% objective when you sit down and write a report? That's a question, especially if you kind of enter their lives and you let them into yours. And also, what if you don't like the student or the student don't like you? Can you still be objective? So that's one of the big questions. Another thing is that in order to have evaluation based on this process, you have to have been part of the process. So what do you actually do if there's a change in teachers, or if the student enters late? How do you document the process, which is very short? You kind of end up focusing on results then, and that's what we don't want to do. And there's no, in Denmark yet, we don't really have a kind of form for documenting the process. So that is also 100% on the teacher's shoulders. And that's a big Achilles heel, because you can't take over someone else's relationship or process anything. You have to start yourself again. So that's another. Again, if we did have some kind of form that you could pass on from teacher to teacher, then you kind of defeat the point again, because then you're putting the student into a box. And then it's not the relationship it's based on again. So you have the problem again in a different way. And last, the third struggle or is you have to be good at writing. You have to, as a teacher, really have writing skills, and that's why it's probably called the art of writing. It's easy for a language teacher or a history teacher, someone who likes to read and write, but the old woodwork teacher who's never picked up a pen in his whole life have to sit down and write a few pages as well. And so does the gym teacher. And even though they see and have a relationship just as much as any other teacher, they might not have the skills of writing. And then what do they do? Also, we have this rule that you're never allowed to put down in writing something that the student cannot use. So you always have to be positive. And it takes writing skills, creative writing skills. If there has been a pupil or a student who has not participated, who's been really, really rude and really just hates school, how do you write that in a positive, constructive way so that the student can kind of see himself in the picture, but not feel either humiliated or something. Yeah. So that's probably why Ilona has called it the art of writing. It is hard work, and also they're starting a bit schools now, but before, until a few years ago, all teachers would have to sit and do this in their spare time. So they'd have all the teaching, they'd do the marking of papers and so on, and then they'd have to sit down and really dive into each student and kind of write a report that they could use further on. So it's, to finish off, it's hard work, and but I still haven't seen anything that's a better way of doing it. And if you've done it really well, and if you really nailed it, it also feels like a kind of gift that you give the student when they kind of leave school and go into life. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilona and Saskia. Ilona for the political background, and Saskia for sharing the dilemmas of alternative forms of assessment with us, which, as you say, are a work in progress all the time. What I particularly liked was when you said it doesn't feel like a struggle because the idea carries it. I think that is an encouraging motto for us all, and leads beautifully into the fourth, and I'm afraid the last, inspiring practice, which will be shared with us by Melinda Lazar from Budapest, from a very unusual school, a school that addresses students who are labeled as having failed the system, when it could be argued that the system has failed the students. This is a school that gives early school leavers, which is a euphemism for so-called dropouts, it gives them a second chance and reshapes pedagogy in order to do this. And Melinda will tell us about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shanti. So my name is Melinda, and I'm a teacher and a mentor in this school where we deal with dropouts. I can share now my presentation. Here. So as you can see that this is an alternative school. It's a second-hand school. And basically in the book, it focuses on one of our lessons, our problem-based lessons, and the assessment processes in that lesson. But now I would like you to see the background to this lesson and assessment. But this lesson is very representative of our school and of our work altogether, because we've got a very special context here. We've got students who have one thing in common. They had all tried secondary schools earlier in their lives, and they come to us with the feeling of failure. They become members of the school after an interview process, which is very similar to a working life interview. They need to speak about what they have had so far, how many years they've tried, how many schools they've tried, and very often they report like 7 schools also, that they tried 7 schools and they dropped out of 7 schools. Well, the reasons are very different, sometimes psychological, sometimes social, sometimes financial. But basically, I don't think that's what is the most important aspect. I think the most important aspect that all these students need a very alternative perspective or approach to them to make sure that they might be successful. So these students are normally aged 16 to 25, but in some cases we have older students at the school, but that's not very typical. Most of the students are about 18 and above, so it's rare that we have students from the age of 16 or 17. Now they have got one thing that I think I can say that the fact that they're dropouts raises quite a lot of questions, and I think that I would like to focus on a couple. The first one is, and the most important is, that what I find is that these students often lose their enthusiasm for studying, and they also lose their hope. And what's more important, that they lose the feeling of being in control. They've got the feeling that the authority above them decides whatever happens to them in their lives, in their studies, and they don't really have a word in it. They don't really know how to control it. So what we want to do, and when they're with us, is to give the feeling of control back to them. And we are trying to design our whole education system and dealing with the students with this hope that we can give something back to them, that they feel that they're in control. Now, how did we do that? I think that the first key element of this is that we are not teachers at the school. We try to appear as partners to the students, and we actually listen to their stories, and we are trying to help them how to get the most out of what they already have. So we want them to focus on what they have and start out from that, setting up targets, and we're trying to help them how to achieve their targets. It's not easy because in Hungary, they have to do an entrance exam if they want to go to universities, or a final exam, and that is actually the same in the whole country. So we also have to prepare them for this. But it's not all a background, because we can use that as an objective target that they have to achieve. And starting from their situation, we can show them ways they can achieve this objective with using their own powers. So the first step is to make them believe that we are not teachers above them who can tell them how and what to do. It's them who can find out what they can do. We're only there to assist and maybe back them up with their experience. But they need to believe that this is really true, and that's a long process. Now, how we do that? We become partners by non-stop communication. So when they come to our school, we talk to them about things they do, they like, and we work together. We've got a mentoring system. I'm also a mentor, as I mentioned, which means that there are no form teachers and classes in our school, but there's a credit system like education, where students choose their own subjects, what they need, because some of them actually come to our schools with some years finished behind in previous schools, and some come with just for 1 year, or maybe they come for 4 years. It depends on what they have behind them. So with the mentors, they can sit down and discuss their own learning goals. And of course, they discuss like what are their strengths and weaknesses, and how they can build a good and effective way of learning. And this is put into a contract with the students that both of them sign, like a working contract. Of course, it also means that we involve the students in the design of the learning process. And also throughout the lessons, we are trying to give them a variety of learning techniques. So if some cannot work with one technique, we are trying to offer them different ones. For example, problem-based learning that is highlighted in the book is also one of these, where they've got lots of opportunities to learn their own ways. Also, sometimes we give them individual learning solutions that can be kind of anything. In the problem-based learning, they have to work in teams, and they have to achieve certain things in their teams. It also helps them understand that they are not alone, and everybody around them are just team members, partners, and they are all there to, achieve this certain goal they've got in mind. Now, I mentioned that we need to, we've got one objective, and that is the final exam or entrance exam for some of them at the end of the secondary school education. And we want to prepare them for this. So we've got exams after, 3 exams in a year, where the expectations are that of the final exams expectations, and that's there the structure of the exams are defined and quite clear. So for lower level students, we give the same structure, but of course with limited material that they have to reproduce. But that is already the first part of the final exam. Now, another thing that can help us, work with these students is partners is just one thing, but also the environment is very, very important that they are in. Now, we've got a very small school, also because I think that hopefully there aren't so many dropouts, but unfortunately the experience is that there are quite a lot. So we've got lots of applicants and we can't accept everybody. But the school has got about 130 pupils, but I don't think that our methods would be possible in a larger school, that it would lose its core values, I'm afraid. So there are about 20 enthusiastic teachers, mentors dealing with these students. And that we've got this mini environment where these students can feel safe and they find these partners, and we're trying to come up with ideas that represent the outside life, but now in a very safe environment. Now, this healing environment has got, the power of together. Now, how can we make sure that they can actually feel that this environment is for them? We have lunch with the kids. We use the same toilet with the kids. We don't have a staff room, and we also have coffee together. But sometimes, the project work I mentioned, that is in teams, so they have to work in teams, as you can see in the photo. We've got, in the other photo, and the unified mugs that we use for coffees. Everybody paints their own mugs, teachers also, and we keep it in one place, and everybody has to wash it up for themselves. So that also gives them the feeling of community. Then they perform their projects that they make at the end of the project time in front of the whole school. So there's a project performance. They also get the assessment of the audience, the school citizens, as that is mentioned in the book. And of course, sometimes we organize school events, and we make some of the project teams responsible for that. So they have to come up with certain programs for these school events. So they organize it for themselves, and then sometimes we help them with money if it's necessary, and then they come up with a nice program, and we all have it together. And also we encourage them to make groups for themselves if they've got difficulties learning, to help each other. So we are trying to encourage them to do that for themselves. Again, this gives them a little bit of feeling of control, and also the feeling of environment, community, and partners. Now, about the classroom and about the problem-based learning, you can see the photos here. And this is a new approach that I think answers very nicely to all these things I've said so far. This is a very new approach. Now, but what is it? It is built around the values of collaboration, independent work, self-directed learning, and we're trying to provide students with a variety of learning experience. Now, the procedure is that they come together, they have a topic, they brainstorm about the topic, and they start designing their work. You can see some of these examples in the photos, but the topics are really varied. Then they have to form teams, and they have to write a schedule how they are going to realize their objectives in their work. And then at the end of the session, they or the time, they perform it, the end product to the whole school. And then the school citizens score the performance. Normally they look at like how creative, how informative this project was. And then after this, there's another session, another meeting, when all the participants of the course come together with the teacher, the group, and everybody assesses kind of everybody. They use also the performance assessment, but then the teacher discusses like how they felt during this whole procedure. Then the group tells their opinion about collaboration, and then everybody speaks about their individual struggles and individual work, and then they also assess themselves in this meeting. And this becomes part of the end mark. So these are percentages, each is about like 20%, and in the end it comes back to like 100%. That's the maximum, and of course they get a score for that. Now, what I like about this, that as I mentioned, it represents, I think, the core values of the school. And you can also see the photos that these students in these lessons actually experience, not just like that they have to work on something that is useful in their lives, but also how life works outside the school, because they will probably have to work in a team with others, and they have to come up with certain targets, and they need to achieve their objectives, and they have to make efforts to do that. And cooperation is really important. But I mean, these students are very often come with the feeling that they don't have control over anything. But here they realize that no, it's not really a disadvantage what they have if they are too shy, or if they are too if they have got other abilities that have not been appreciated before, that can be used as an advantage, and that makes their work colorful, that makes the end results really colorful. So they can be free to express themselves, because that is a very important part of the work, and that is then considered as values, and they learn that they can actually be in control of what is happening to them. And that's, I think, what we really want to achieve with these students. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you very much. And what we take away mainly, I think, is what you say about the power of together, beyond the power of hierarchies that separates teachers and students. Thank you so much. And in fact, next we will go on to the power of us who are in this room, as we hand back to Michiel for the discussion, because I'm sure that there will be many comments and observations directed to these marvelous speakers we have just heard. And you will have further opportunity to talk to them in the post-quark, which begins at 1 o'clock. And the link is the same as you have used for the Zoom. Thank you, Michiel.
You're on mute, Michiel.
There I go. Thank you, Shanti, for facilitating this part of the meeting. In the first place, I want to congratulate the whole team for this wonderful book and for this compilation of beautiful projects. And it's really a wonderful contribution to the dialogue that we have together, also with the institutions about this subject. Are there any questions? Who wants to come forward with a question? Maybe you can put me in a normal screen where I can see everybody, Chiara. Because I see only myself now, and I like to see everybody.
Michiel, I think that's something you can change yourself.
Gallery, yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. And I would just encourage anyone that has a question to put up their virtual hand, and I can also help you, Michiel, with identifying
that's
possible
good.
hands if you want.
Yes.
The first one is always the hardest.
But otherwise, I can ask a question. Would Annette van Valkengoed react to one of the presentations? You come from Amsterdam, and you have heard the other. Have you got a question? Put on the microphone.
I have a lot of questions, of course. I'm very curious about all the beautiful examples. So I would like to visit all the schools and places. But a question. There was something in the chat about you can never be objective by yourself, by a written report. And I was thinking about writing with a group of teachers and to make it objective. So I have a question to Saskia, whether they use each other's perspectives to write a report. Is that a clear question?
Yeah, I think so. If you mean, do we sit down and talk and then go and write the report?
Yes.
Well, in an ideal world, yes, we do. Normally, it's if we struggle with a student, now what would you write or something, then we ask each other. But because there's no kind of, it's not put in a timetable or anything, it's really hard to find the time where everybody could sit down. But we have often talked that in an ideal world we'd have to sit down and discuss each student. but then there's always something at the end of a school year which takes up time. But it is interesting, this whole objective, because I'm not saying that we're actually trying, that we think we have to be objective. That's not the aim. But it is still, when you write to a student, when they leave school, we write in third person, because when we write to the youngest, we write to the parent, so we kind of talk about the child in that way. And then at the middle school, so of class 6 to 9, 10, we write to the pupil. But you have to write for example, the university, when you describe the student when they leave school. And that kind of formality in the language kind of makes it sound like it's, and I see we can try and replace the word objective, but it's if you describe someone, it tends to sound objective, but it's a description coming from you yourself. And the more teachers, if we sat down and all of us kind of found out a way to describe it, it would improve, no doubt. Because then we could get a little closer, I think, yeah.
I see Nicole that he wants to react. So I give the floor to Nicole.
Thank you, Michiel. It's really wonderful and interesting to hear, and I think the whole theme is about trusting the judgment and embracing the subjectivity that will always come around it, and try to get rid of that strange need to establish certainty for the future, which is the whole problem. What I would like to say is that I am in the middle of launching a new teacher training institute in Rotterdam together with the Erasmus University, and we have been able to convince both the examining board of the university as well as the officials in the ministry in The Hague, that we are allowed to go without giving grades. So students will only get feedback on the data points that they themselves gather to prove or to show that they are developing the qualities that we would like to see them develop. And at the end of it's a 2-year master, where they will receive a Master of Science, as well as the license to teach in primary schools. It's a course that takes 2 years, and at the end of year 1, they get the formal assessment that they are allowed to go to the 2nd year or not. So they will not get grades for individual exams and subjects and projects. It is just that, and we do that in a feedback kind of way. And I just invited, when the meeting started, I invited Rob Kikkert, who designed this assessment program and pulled it through all the official instances, and he's here. So Rob, I don't know if you want to add how we go about this subjectivity question.
Well, I think the main decision we made is letting go of the objective to be objective. So the highest thing you can reach is intersubjectivity, and that's what we're going for. So embracing subjectivity, having valuable feedback given by the teachers, and reaching intersubjectivity, well, by letting the teachers discuss with each other, but also by having a committee of people reaching independent decisions at the end of the year, and then putting these decisions next to each other in order to see if they agree, if they can reach a consensus. And if they don't agree, you add more people into the committee until they do reach an agreement. that's the only thing I would like to add, I think.
What I notice is that it is all the examples are child-centered and less the subject or content centered. It is the development of the child-centered approach in education, and I think that is the one of the secrets of the success of all these examples.
So, Michiel, we have several hands that are up.
I don't see it. Tell me.
Yes,
Okay.
I'll tell you. So we have Helma Brouwers, Mati Domokos, and Georg. So I suggest to go to those three people that have had their hand up.
I go to Georg. I start with Georg.
Thank you very much, Michiel. I have a question for Saskia that I kind of also want to extend to the whole group. Saskia, you mentioned that in an ideal world, of course, you would sit together to work on these reports to then achieve what Rob has described as more intersubjectivity. And we understood implicitly that the problem here is time and space and the school timetable. And I wanted to ask you whether this is, from your perspective, homework for the school leadership to make that space, or whether this is actually a political challenge that needs to be addressed to policymakers so that schools get more time, get more staff to make this happen.
Thank you. Well, I would say it's school leaders primarily. If we want to have these written reports, it should be the leaders that kind of make the timetable. But the problem is you always write them during Easter, and how do you make a timetable for just the few months before there? Of course, it should be policymakers if it's if they want this kind of evaluation instead of numerical grades. But as long as the policymakers don't believe that this is the right way or the best way of seeing the child, they wouldn't be able to help anyway. So it would have to be the leaders of the school. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's a local problem as long as it's the school that just has this practice. But it would be nice if it is a question of money in the end, because you have to put all of these subjects in during a school year. And if we allow teachers to have more time to write, that would be policy making, I guess. I think that's as close as I can without knowing how much. In Denmark, the policymakers don't interfere with the school leaders or timetables or anything like that at all. They just give a sum of money to the school, and then it's up to the school to use them how they find the best. So, yeah.
Then it's a question of resource allocation if it's a political question, I think. So that was, I guess, where I wanted to go. Is there enough staff to do this?
In Steiner schools, or in schools in general?
As well.
I don't think I can answer the question, because I really, it's like some can sit down and they can write a report in 5 minutes, and others, they take 2 hours to write them. And how can you put that into a policy? I still think it's something you have to look at. We probably have to look at the teachers individually as well. I don't think policies can solve that one. Well, they can always give more money, but
we go to Marti.
Thank you, Michiel. I would just like to add that, as you saw it, Matt, the first question was actually from one of the teachers in the book to another teacher in the book. And what we didn't talk about today is that this is, of course, a project. So for us, this book is not a kind of end product. We planned a peer learning and invited all the teachers who contributed in October. But in the end, due to the rising COVID numbers, most of them canceled, and then we canceled the event. But we plan to do more events next year where we can discuss things. And the whole goal of our book is a kind of conversation, to be a conversation starter. And this is what's reflected back today here so very well. So between teachers and between everyone who has to deal in one way or another with assessment. So I'm very happy that we are reaching this stage of having a book and starting on conversations. So I just wanted to add this aspect of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Then it is the floor for Helma, and then for Leah.
Well, thank you, Michiel, and thank all the presenters. I thought it was one of the best presentations, best talks we ever had. I enjoyed it from the beginning to the end. And of course, there are so many more questions than what I can pose now. But I think besides objectivity, we have this problem of the old idea of standardized goals. I think Annette, for instance, she mentioned the inspection, and they want you to show what did you reach, what did the children attain. And you mentioned it, Annette, and you said something like, no, you are at this excellent school. So you somehow tackled this problem, saying we do formative assessment, but also a little bit of a mixture with formal. And so I was very curious to know, how do you deal with that problem that inspection expects you to have to attain standardized goals? I heard that you want to attain so many more goals. Of course, that is one of the beautiful things of all the presentations today, more than just the formal schoolish learning, etc. So can you tell me more, Annette, about the exact assessment, the way you do it now, and how you compromise in this aspect?
I go to Annette to respond.
Okay. That's a long story. We struggled a lot with it, but we built a Triband accountability matrix, and it's based on the ideas of also Gert Biesta, with qualification, socialization, personification. And we built it from tribands. So the child towards their own developments, the development of the school or parts of the school to each other, the units in the school, and a little bit towards the standardized test. And we made the tribands self-directed learning from the children, we made it big and the other part small. And to show this to the inspection, they became aware of what they were asking us. So we have 9 parts to show the inspection, and they were only asking us one of these parts in this matrix. And they, in the first place, they wanted to see the test, but later on they trusted more on our system. So it was a matter of time when there was a shift towards more written reports of the children. But it is a lot of work. That's a downside. So teachers do need more time. And Saskia asked, I asked it, asked Saskia, and she mentioned it as well. Teachers do need more time to work with it. So we made 2 systems in one, but to bring it further, something is needed in policy and policy makers. But we wanted to show it is possible, and now yeah, something must happen to bring it further on.
Yeah. Thank you, Annette. I go to Leah.
Thank you. My question was very similar to that what Helma presented, and also Annette's response was good, relevant to me. What she described is close to the Finnish system. We don't use standardized tests. Teachers are trained to assess children's performances according to quite broad goals, and they are trusted. But now, during recent years, some more exact descriptions are given, or have been given to teachers. For instance, on the scale, we use the scale from 4 to 10. So what the child should know, or what the knowledge base should be in order to get the point 8, for instance. And then this description gives a reference, frame of reference for the evaluation. Of course, it is a continuous process to negotiate how this scale is used, and it is critical from the transition from the lower secondary school to higher secondary school. So what the evaluations are. But in general, the issue of subjectivity, objectivity was in my mind related to the task, the goal of the assessment. So if it is a question of the performance, it is of course easier to be objective. If there are certain criteria, if the child is learning languages or mathematics and or writing, there are certain qualitative categories that the child has to achieve. But if the assessment concerns the child's personality in any way, then it becomes much more difficult or impossible to be objective. It is always subjective. And so I didn't catch in these nice presentations what kind of categories should be assessed, or what the assessment concerns. Also, I was curious to know how these wonderful pedagogical examples are applied to teaching, let's say, foreign languages, mathematics, writing, those basic skills that children need to learn in primary school. It's wonderful to connect teaching with everyday activities. It motivates you, and I really love it. But is there something new also in teaching these more traditional abilities that are needed as a result of school? Thank you very much for the presentations.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. Yes.
Nikhil, maybe Leah's question could be answered by Carmen and Adriana from Romania, because they deal with early childhood education and
That
how
is
to
good.
incorporate the formal learning of mathematics and language with play activities.
For me, it's okay, but we must also watch the time. It is meanwhile 11:51, so I want then to go to Adriana and this from Romania, and then I would like to go to Daniel to say a few words, and then we go to LLL for closing remarks. Okay, I go to Adriana.
International curriculum. So here in step-by-step classrooms, all the lessons are studied in activity centers. Step-by-step is following the national curriculum when we are thinking about standards, but the methodology and the method used with children is different than in the traditional classrooms, meaning that here having 8 hours per day when children are working with 2 teachers, they have enough time to make individualized intervention and activities with the children when they are working in the centers, and they can study mathematics, for example, not only in the mathematics center, they can use their that concepts they have to fulfill for a period. They can be introduced with them also in the building center, also in the science center, also at the art center. So this is how our methodology is used to develop the academical skills to the children in a more appropriate way to their age.
Thank you. Now I go to Daniel. I saw that Daniel is there. Daniel, hello. Daniel, welcome also in our group.
Yes.
And yeah.
Okay. I would like to say that it was extremely inspiring to participate to this QOC, and that I look forward for people to follow up and continue the discussion in the post-QOC afterwards. What touched me is the fact that we really need to look at assessment for each and every child, and each and every child is different. And we need to look at each and every child from the perspective of what Christopher has referred to, the four perspectives: the learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. So, and of course, give value to each child's unique potential. So we need to remember that basically assessment is for each and every child different, and the child is where the curriculum starts. And so I salute all these various examples of how we can actually do that.
What I want to add to your words is that, of course, we want to take it further. And I want to congratulate Daniel, because today he sent me a little picture of himself speaking with Ursula von der Leyen. Do you allow me to show the picture that you sent me this morning,
okay,
Daniel? I just put it here. Wait a moment. There it is.
I mean, you're embarrassing me. It was.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Here, can you see it? Daniel, yes, with Ursula von der Leyen speaking. So.
Well, I'm preparing, hopefully, for the European launch of the UNICEF study on core capacities. So I thought we should go to the top, but I mean, this is just
and you succeeded, and you succeeded.
That's the beginning.
That is good. I think we have agreed now that we go now to LLL. They have the floor for closing remarks. So is it Andrea or Maria who will speak?
Hi, Michael. Thank you very much. Actually, it was supposed to be Arja Kraukenberg, our vice president, but unfortunately, she had family issues and she could not deliver the final remarks. I am not a representative of LLLP. I'm just a staff member, but I would like to thank you nonetheless for this very, very inspiring event all across the Lifelong Learning Week. This was one of the events that I was looking forward the most, just because it would really bring the concrete practices to the attention of our network and our members and our partners. And I'm very happy that it did so by sharing inspiring stories where assessment methods can indeed be weighted out with the well-being of learners. And I think this was very interesting from the point of view of pedagogy and how little and yet how much it takes to take a step forward. I'm not really, again, I'm not really a representative of LLLP, so I cannot speak on behalf of our network, but I would like to thank you for the organization of this event.
And we thank you to do this together with you. Now I